Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA, and every week, a guest therapist, counselor, or social worker joins me in the theater to talk about a movie that we've seen and what relationships or mental health issues it highlights. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes, and while you're doing that, you can help other people find it by giving the show a 5-star rating and writing a review for it in the podcast app. Oh yeah, and make sure you tell your friends. You can also stay connected with what's happening in the theater by following us on social media. Links to our accounts are in the show notes. This week's guest is Jessie Whitfield. Jessie's returning to the theater for a second round, having changed her role in helping others. She's now a therapist turned life coach, helping people connect to intuition and confidence, engage with their emotions in a healthy way, and love their life through awareness, boundaries, and affirmations. So let's get this show started, shall we? Dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Jessie, welcome back to the theater. I am so glad that you are here.
I love being here. I'm so excited today.
How are you doing?
I am doing great.
I love it.
Yes, it's been a crazy time, but I think we're all doing our best.
That has been the theme of our house, as well as the theme that I'm using with clients for this whole year. We're just doing our best.
Yep.
And that's good enough.
Absolutely.
If clients have gotten concerned that their dog is barking in the background or that they've got to do the appointment in their car, we're doing our best.
Right. It does not matter.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Yeah. This is not our plan A, but it's a pretty decent plan B. So we're just going to roll with it.
Absolutely.
Well, before I ask you our first official question, not only the year's been big for you in several ways.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. Is there any of those that you want to share?
I guess, we'll start with that. As of right now, I'm 7 months pregnant with our second little.
A bebe.
Yes, which definitely has led to a lot of my own personal work, starting with the fact that, it was very much so planned. And I found out that officially, yes, I am pregnant. I think the same week that we had our first official case in either Davidson or Williamson County of COVID. I'm like, oh, so this is going to be real interesting.
Huh.
Yeah.
How do you I don't remember if we talked Enneagram last time you were here. Where do
I don't know.
Do you have a number? Are you into that?
Ish.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, I think I'm a 9.
Okay. I was just thinking I'm a 6, and I feel like if Leanne were pregnant during the pandemic, my fear and preparation to protect from the fear would go into such overdrive that I feel like it would be almost unbearable for her. So
I actually I was talking to somebody recently about Enneagram and the pandemic and pregnancy and whatnot. And they asked me hey, do you know what your husband? And I was like, you know what? I don't. And I really need to figure that out, because I think that would help me so much because he definitely kind of goes into that hyperdrive awareness. I'm really scared that this is what's going to happen to you. And I'm like, babe, I have no concern about that. I'll be fine. But for him, it's so very real. And it's a very different perspective. That's I kind of need some help understanding your brain right here.
I think that I only know enough to be dangerous. I don't actually know enough to be helpful, but I know that the things that and the only reason I know anything about the type that I am is because in our, in introduction to psychological assessments class in grad school, the final project was, hey, do 6 assessments on yourself and then present your findings to the class. which now that I'm talking about it feels very vulnerable. I'm really surprised that I was like, yeah, I'm on board for that. But you know, we had several people at Trevecca who were certified in administering it. And so I was lucky enough to where one of them was willing to assess me or offer the assessment to me. And so the stuff that I found out about me and then the little bit of reading I've done afterwards has helped Leanne understand how my brain works quite a bit. And like the most obvious, I think, example is we were going on some road trip and, I have systems for everything. Like I have systems, I have routines, I have ways that my brain has settled into not forgetting stuff because it helps me feel safe. And so like I make packing lists every time we're about to go somewhere, and I pack the car because I really like Tetris and I look at it as a challenge. And for whatever reason, this road trip, I wasn't able to do that. Like, I don't know if I had class or I was working or I don't know what it was. So she did it. And then like, we're getting ready to leave and I am just in a funk. Like I am all kinds of funky. We're in the car. I'm still in the funk. I don't know what's going on. And then we both kind of realized, oh, I didn't pack the car. So I don't know for sure that everything we need is in the car. So now I'm scared that we're going to forget something. And if we forget something, we're not prepared, which makes me double feel unsafe. Yeah. It was this weird, like, ability to understand, you know, the thing that was making my brain kind of curl up on itself.
That sounds so helpful though.
Yeah. That was something that was helpful for us. I think it's an appropriate subject considering the movie that we're going to talk about. Like, because I think that is one of the reasons why people love Enneagram so much right now. But you know, I think that for me, hearing how your year has kind of been so far, I'm just imagining, like, I can't imagine how many lists I would have made. I can't imagine how many plans, like, sheesh, it would have been crazy. So you got a bebe on the way.
Yes.
And I don't know when we'll talk about it. I mean, if you want to fit in a little bit now, but you got a little bit of a career shift happening.
Yeah. Depending on your perspective, some people find it a very big career shift. One of my best friends who's a therapist is like, I'm really sad that you're doing this. I don't know how to feel about it. And I was like, that's okay. I get it. Like, I used to hold a lot of your ideas around this. So that's totally fine. And we can talk about it as much as you want. And you can still do consultation for your clients with me. It's fine.
It feels like she's grieving.
She kind of is. No joke. She kind of is.
All right.
Yeah. So I don't remember when it was, but a few months back, I decided to open up, in addition to my therapy private practice, kind of a branch where I did coaching, to allow for a little bit of flexibility and a little bit of shift in perspective and the kind of ways that I was showing up and doing my work with my clients. And I think too, just to open up the kind of clients that I was drawing in as well. And at first it was, I think, kind of this place of, man, I've been doing trauma work intensively for like a decade now, and I need a little bit of a break, and I need to be able to be like more present and future focused and have a little bit of levity to the clientele that I'm working with. And coaching seemed like a really natural fit for that. But the more I was in it, the more I really had to face, now, wait a minute, how do you really feel about this? Because you used to be that therapist that's like talking to these clients about, I'm not really sure if that life coach is a great idea for you because, you know, and I know from some of my friends and just some of the professional community that, you know, I'm tapped into, there is a lot of, I think, almost stigma and judgment around coaching. You know, you and I talked about it a little bit, but it is very much so something that doesn't have a whole lot of regulations around it. You can just have anybody walk out of the street and say, hey, I'm a life coach. Pay me money and we're going to talk about XYZ with no expertise and no training. And I think as a therapist, we've gone through all of this training and we have all of this, depth of understanding to the ways that we could potentially do damage to our clients and, the ethical upholdings to make sure that we don't, that it feels really scary and threatening to have these people just coming in the door saying like, I'm a life coach, pay me money and we're going to fix your problems or we're going to
or I've
transform
even
your
seen
life.
people like attach a specifier to it. I'm a relationship coach. I'm a vocational coach. I'm a
Yep.
and it's kind of like defining their niche in their title.
Oh yeah. And I'm not going to lie, like that's part of what I've done. I make no qualms about like, I am not accredited. I have no plans to get accredited. I have a
Is there an
therapy
accreditation
background.
for coaching?
There are a couple of different ones. There's not a whole lot of regulation. So it's not a, like, this is the organization you go through. Like we have for our different kind of, therapy degrees that, okay, for social work, you go through this one. If you're MFT, you go through this. There are a whole lot of different organizations that say, okay, come and take X length course and you're an accredited life coach. So I think that that's another reason where it doesn't necessarily feel safe or smart. But what I have found is, for me, stepping into that realm provides such a greater depth of flexibility. I'm already a pretty darn direct therapist, despite what they teach us in school around that. But I found myself sitting across from my therapy clients saying, I really want to say this to her, but because I'm in therapy mode, not about to.
Yeah.
But
you think that was fear-based? That's fear-based.
Oh, huge fear-based, and I think a lot of that for me comes back to like the ethics of everything and like what happens if you get sued, what about a malpractice suit and somebody coming after you and the liability and my background working in an inpatient setting, having the very real pressure, even though we all know, like if somebody were to follow through and die by suicide, like that's not our fault. That's a huge pressure that we are responsible for somebody's life in that way.
Yeah.
And it became something that was standing in my way. To where I wasn't feeling comfortable engaging because I felt like I am carrying all of the responsibility, but there's almost a pass for clients because it's this idea of you're too sick to hold your own responsibility.
Do you think that was the population or the specialty you were working with? I mean, if you would have just been doing basic anxiety counseling, would you have felt that same?
I don't think I would have. I think it absolutely had a high correlation to the population I was working with and the acuity I was seeing on a daily basis. Working in that outpatient setting, I ran women's trauma groups for I don't know how long. And I can't tell you how many one-on-ones I had sitting with a client after we had done our groups, where we're talking very detailed safety plans. How do we know that when you go home today, as best as possible, you're not going to make an attempt? Do we need to look at hospitalization? How real is this for you right now? And there's a lot of outpouring, I think, from us when we have those conversations, because we're genuinely concerned about our clients. We genuinely care about our clients' well-being. And it's a really scary thing, to feel almost that weight and that pressure of like, I know that this isn't my decision and that's not my responsibility, but I also feel responsible for your life in that way.
Yeah.
And if I could have said this one thing different, or if I could have done this one thing different, would it have stopped you? And I don't know about for you, but in my practice over the last decade, I've lost several clients. And that's never an easy thing to process and go through. No matter when it is or what the situation around it was, there's a weight to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like you've said bits and pieces, but typically, when I have a guest and I ask them why therapy, why do you do what you do? Why coaching? Like, why are you heading in that direction and you're going to make that shift?
So for me, it really finally came down to after I started opening up this little branch of, let me see if this is better. Um, I found that I was able to even more deeply connect with my clients. We were able to do work almost in this more intimate and sacred way, that I was able to hold space for them. And these people were really showing up for themselves differently than they showed up when I held space for them in a therapy setting. They were taking more accountability and forward mobility in the things that they were doing to really shift their lives. And the way that I do this, because part of the way that I do coaching, not only are we doing, your typical 50, 60-minute session, all virtual at this point, instead of face to face, but you're also texting or voice messaging me in between with things that are coming up. So we're doing very real, this is the present moment, this is where you are. How do you gain a greater awareness of what's going on within yourself? How do you create safety for yourself in these moments? How do you have a healthy engagement with your emotions instead of letting them kind of overrun you or feel like they're somehow in control of you? And then following all of that up, okay, what's your next step? What do you need to really prolong this sense of safety? Or what do you need in that conversation with your boss or your partner to hold a boundary maybe around, this is how I want to be supported and this is what I'm asking of you. And I think because of that, I saw people really flourishing. And that was something that really energized me, because it's like, man, when it can take so long in a therapeutic process, because I feel like, we have this little chunk of time and you've got to tell me everything, that it doesn't always feel like there's movement. And so being able to see that and have that shift has really been freeing. And it's been something that I've really found that I love.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like, based on your experience and your self-awareness, you're finding a way to serve people, help them make change that is a better fit for you.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah. And I think for me, one of the big things was really looking at, I'm not going to pretend like I don't have a therapy background. I'm not going to, say I didn't put in all this time and effort, but I can use all of those skills in the way that I show up for my clients and just do a little bit tweaked.
Well, I can't see how having those things would hurt. I mean, that,
right. Like, I feel like that gives me a leg up.
Yeah. It seems like going from therapist to coach is an easier transition than maybe the other way. I don't know if you can make that transition the other way, other than doing it the old fashioned way of like, yeah, I'm going to be a therapist. I'm going to go to grad school. I'm going to do a practicum and internship. And then, 7 years later, there you are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I think that's exactly how that would look.
So are you going to maybe have any kind of concentration in your coaching?
I am. I'm still kind of playing with what does that really look like? Just within the last few months, I think kind of looking at my pregnancy this time versus my last pregnancy and some of the postpartum issues that I found, I've really been feeling called to create some sort of support that really caters to women at the very tail end of their pregnancy through that newborn stage. Because I think what I see is kind of a misunderstanding of what does it really look like to support mom. And there's a lot of focus on new baby, new family, but not a lot of focus on how's mom doing? Has she eaten today? Has she taken a shower? Has she slept? Is she doing anything to feed into herself? Because there is such a huge draw on you as a new mom for this little tiny life. And I think that's even a little bit different from the draw that is on dads, especially early on in that stage. And I know that for me personally, that would have been hugely critical. And I think it really would have changed the way my postpartum went with my daughter. And that's something that I'm looking to have in place to an extent as I'm having my son now. So that's something that I'm kind of planning for. And then what I do right now with a lot of my coaching clients is really focusing on helping them kind of create a greater self-awareness and tap into their own intuition and their truth. Like, what do I actually think about this? What do I believe? What do I want? Not what does, my parent or my partner or my teacher or my boss tell me I should think about these things, but what's true for me?
Yeah.
And then again, looking at what are those healthy engagements with emotions and how do we put those boundaries in place to really get you where you want when you know your truth.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's really easy for us to fall into this dynamic of being driven again by our emotions, especially fear. And I think that's one of the things that's been highlighted over the last few months is the way that fear can play such an impactful role in our lives. And it's very different from person to person. Which way does that kind of push you in terms of how you respond to that fear? And a lot of times I see people kind of get stuck there or stop there because of that. And I don't think that that's how it has to be.
Yeah, because fear as an emotion can be, if we don't engage with it truly, such an instinctual thing. It just activates these instincts with us. So if we don't, not even don't, if we're unable to or unwilling to like pause, what is it that I believe I'm in danger from?
Yeah.
Is this a true message? And try to get some perspective, then we kick into those fight, flight, freeze, fawn, like instinctual responses that it's really more about reaction than it is about decision.
Absolutely. And I think it was funny, you know me and how this process went the first time. I was like, this is my favorite movie. This is what we're going to do. Didn't put a whole lot of thought into it. Similarly, this time, you and I were talking about what do we do? And I just kind of like this movie in general. I was like, I don't know where we're going with therapy with this, but it sounds fun. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things that I recognized was like, oh, maybe this is why I'm drawn to it. Because every single character, time and time again, you see how does fear motivate them.
Yeah. Well, before we jump into that, first, did you know that there was a Princess Bride cast reunion, I think last week, that Josh Gad put on, like I think like a virtual Zoom. I want to say like rereading of it or something like that.
Yes. I love it. It makes me so happy.
Yeah. And what movie did you bring for us to talk about today to get into?
So I chose Divergent.
Yeah. 2014.
Uh-huh.
Riding the wave of YA movie adaptations.
Yep.
So when I told Leanne that this is the one you picked, and I said I was going to watch it, she's like, "Oh, you're going to watch it?" I was like, "Well, I've already seen it, but like the process for doing these is I got to watch it again because I have enough trouble remembering character names right after I've watched it, much less I saw this when it came out." Like, and I remember Leanne was like, what do you mean you already saw it? I was like, yeah, I already saw this. And she's like, why would you have seen this? And I said, well, I mean, because it was a movie. And she's like, I don't. And I said, I used to watch somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 65 movies a year in the theater, like several years ago before I grew up as a person and took on the many responsibilities that I accumulated, and I had time to do that. And also we had a local theater that if you went, I think before noon on Saturdays, movies were less than $5, like new release movies. So for me, it was just like, well, nobody's up yet. And, I got the time and I can afford it. So why not? But I saw it like back then. And plus, I was like, it was a YA adaptation and I really liked Hunger Games. And so I thought, people say it's like that. It isn't.
Right. Like very small similarities, but okay.
Same kind of tone.
Yeah.
There's a female heroine. That's, but I had seen it before, but I still wanted to watch it again. And I found it this morning. I watched it. So why this movie?
So again, I think that the first thing was just as I was thinking about coming back on here and thinking about, how does this correlate with kind of the shift in my business and the clients that I work with, um, it felt appropriate somehow. Looking at this crazy division that they have outlined in the story, and you do have this, female lead who goes through this process of transformation. And I think you see her at the very beginning with just this tiny glimmer of awareness that she's not really sure where she stands, but she's never really put in a whole lot of thought or effort to figure out, who am I and what do I want and what's my truth? And that felt very aligned to the kind of work that I'm doing with a lot of my clients.
Yeah.
And so I was interested to kind of look at it from that perspective and just see, what did I see when I'm viewing this through that lens?
Yeah, I could definitely see this being an empowerment tale,
Mm-hmm.
because it does seem like Triss as a character goes from a go with the flow kind of person. Because I didn't get the sense towards the beginning that it was necessarily she was being actively oppressed, like
No.
told kind of, I just got the sense of her experience and worldview was limited, and this is what she knew. And then given the chance to make a choice, make a change, that sounds like Man in the Mirror, so I'm not going to start singing that. But given the choice, she quite literally just jumps and sees where that world takes her. Which I think that anytime somebody's going to make a change in their life, it can feel just like that. It can feel like, I don't know what's going to come next. And this feels crazy risky, but here we go.
Yeah. And I think too, for me, there were a lot of things watching this that just hit home for me, and like the journey that I've been on these last few months. Parenting has been something that took me a little bit by surprise, and it was a more difficult journey and adjustment at times than I had expected. And so I think some of this too was kind of that, man, I resonate with her in this place of fear and not knowing, and making the decision to jump anyway and dive into this, because I'm having to do that myself in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I know for me, I hit a point somewhere in the midst of all of this craziness in the world the last few months where I realized, like, I really was not okay, and I'd been avoiding that fact. And I hadn't been taking care of myself or doing any of my own work. And I really, really needed to, because this little tiny human who's not even 2 is running my life a whole lot more than I need her to and want her to, because of my stuff that was coming up. And that was a really scary thing for me to kind of walk into and say, man, I'm really afraid, because my story is having such a huge impact on this little human whose life I really want to be amazing.
That feels really important. Like, it feels like you came to a place of recognizing the way that I live my life, your life, will have a direct impact on my kid. And so if I'm not, and I think when you were describing earlier kind of your desired concentration in coaching, it made me kind of wonder, I've never been a mom. I'm never going to be a mom. I have a mom. Hopefully my wife will be a mom. But it kind of made me wonder if there is, and I can imagine this being true, a really ease in kind of slipping into duty mode as a mom, no pun intended. Like you just kind of going, this human is my job now, and I am no longer me.
Oh yeah.
I am mom.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I could see, like, I mean, from what we know about therapy, like whenever you turn yourself off like that, your resources are going to be depleted, and life will feel empty.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, it was compounded because my personal story and my history, I learned very early on how to do that, to take care of others and to shut down and manage and almost to disconnect from my emotions.
Hmm.
And it was everybody else first, me second, or somewhere else down the line, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and so kind of coming to this realization in the middle of a pandemic where like I really am confined to how much I can do, not just because of the pandemic, but because I am pregnant in addition to that. And because I have people in my life who are in that higher risk category that, you know, I'm responsible for kind of taking care of their health and not exposing them as well. Like, so it felt very heavy and very scary. But because of my personal history already being kind of used to managing and doing everything for everybody else, I wasn't paying attention to and being aware of the ways that um, I was almost being triggered by my kids' emotions. And I was really parenting in a way to make sure that she didn't have experiences that I had, or that she did have experiences that I didn't have. And I'm like, now, wait a minute, this isn't about her. This is about me. And that's not okay.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
so I am not going to lie, I fought tooth and nail. I was super just pissy and resentful for at least a few weeks, if not a few months, that like I've had this realization and now I have to actually do something about it, or decide that I'm not going to do something about it and live with it, which was not okay. So I knew I was going to do something about it, but I needed to be pissed off about it for a hot minute
Yeah.
before I could get to that place of accepting, okay, this is where I am, and I am an adult, and therefore I am responsible for my own change. So what am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
And so it was at that point that I stepped back into my own personal work. I found myself a coach that I felt was really qualified, and she had experiences that I could relate to across the board with not only parenting, you know, of her own little person, but kind of some of that reparenting work that I knew I was going to have to do for myself,
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
some of the marriage issues that were coming into play, and some of the I'm working in a healing field and I'm not okay right now issues.
Yeah.
Um, and I felt really, really good about hiring her as my coach. Also because of some of my biases around coaching. Like, I recognize how much damage coaches can do. And one of her big things is this is not okay in the coaching industry. And if you're going to be in the coaching industry, you need to be called to a higher standard, and you need to be doing things a certain way so that you're not doing damage to your clients.
Yeah.
And so I really respected that in her, and I felt really comfortable stepping into the work that I'm doing with her.
Wow. I think it's so interesting how your, I guess, parenting helped you come to a realization that there was reparenting work that needed to be
Yeah.
done. One of my good friends back in South Carolina told me before, the best thing that a parent can do for their kids is to work on their own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And while we don't have kids yet, I have enough friends that do, to where I get a chance to like talk with them, you know, about meaningful, deep things, to where I can see like, wow, yeah. I mean, that it's just such a, I think going to be a tremendous benefit for your kid,
Yeah.
that you've been able to have these realizations now, you know,
Yeah.
rather than 10 years down the road when you're, you know, screaming at her with bloodshot eyes, you know,
Exactly.
because
Right.
she brought home a B- on her math test, or, you know,
Yeah. Like
something like that.
that is not the kind of mama I want to be. And I don't want to show up as that. And I realized I was headed kind of down that path. And I was like, no,
Yeah.
that's not okay.
Yeah. Um, let's go back to talking about the fear
Yeah.
in the movie, because I think, you know, even like mentioning the Enneagram just a little bit at the beginning,
Mhm.
um, From what I know about the type 6, which is the type that I am, one of the things that helped me to understand that I could use the information that type gave me in my own life was how that type engages with fear.
Mm-hmm.
And the person that offered the assessment to me described it as either overly cautious or a daredevil. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense at all. How can that be in the same person? Because I think I was just thinking like, we're all binary. We're all either one thing or the other. This is sarcasm. But she was saying 6s engage with fear as a daredevil or as overly cautious. And she said, basically, it's the tried and true trope of being controlled by something, but only responding in the extremes. When the fear catches you, the overly cautious is I'm frozen in indecision.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm in danger and I am too afraid to do anything.
Yeah.
Versus the daredevil is I'm not going to think about this. I'm going to disregard the feeling, or maybe not even disregard. I'm going to deny it. I'm going to reject it, and I'm going to act anyway, which is the same amount of control.
Yep.
It's just a response as the pendulum has swung all the way the other way. And I remember this was, let's see, my birthday is in October. This class was happening in the spring or summer. And so as she was saying this to me, I was thinking back to the birthday that I had, a few months before that, where Leanne had, taken me on this whole day, and we had gone for this hike at Falls Creek Falls. And as we got to the top of one of these, I don't know, it's not the top of a mountain, but it was like a big overlook or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
She kind of goes off to the left and she's like doing this lookout over this big, cavern or whatever. And I look kind of forward and I see at the end of this trail, there is a drop and there is a tree just on the other side of it. That was basically like a fire pole. Like it was the same circumference. It was sticking up about 3 or 4 feet from the ledge and it went all the way down. I walked over, I took a look down, probably 10 feet down. And so I went back, 10 or so feet, and I just started running and I jumped and I grabbed the tree. And about that time I heard this blood curdling scream.
Yep.
And my plan was I was going to grab the tree. I was going to swing back around, put my legs on either side of the tree and just walk it down that tree. And so she had screamed and she was like, "What are you doing? Oh my gosh." And
Yep.
My response was, "Hey, you scared me. I could have fallen." That was
Oh my gosh.
That was my response in the moment. And so, which this is all so strange because I am deathly afraid of heights, like deathly afraid of heights.
So total daredevil moment.
Yeah. And what was funny is, when the person that was assessing, kind of told me this daredevil or overly cautious, that's the memory that came to mind.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment, I recognized there was a fear. And then I said, I won't engage with it. And I turned it off and I acted anyway. And there were so many times, and to this day, if I bring that story up, I get a glare from my wife.
Yeah, can't say I'm surprised. I would probably do the same thing with my husband.
And so in watching the movie, it seemed like there were so many times where Triss had the same kind of response. Like she, the basic skeleton of the story is they live in this dystopian society where somebody at some point, and I think this takes place in Chicago. I think.
No clue.
Only because I thought that there was a building that looked like the Sears Tower. So I don't even know if it's supposed to be Chicago or if they just shot it in Chicago. I don't know. But this dystopian society where they've decided everybody gets divided into one of 5 factions. Is that what they call them?
Yeah, factions.
Okay. Factions. And somehow that's going to make society run better. Mm-hmm. I didn't really get that part. But abnegation, amity, candor, dauntless, and erudite.
Yep.
And each of the factions has a primary personality trait. that they're known for. Abnegation. I'm saying these words and I don't actually know what they mean. But abnegation are selfless. Amity are peaceful. Candor are honest. That makes sense. Dauntless are brave, and erudite are intellectual. And then they each have like a primary color. Abnegation's gray, amity's yellow, candor's white, dauntless is red, and erudite is blue.
Yep.
Which I thought they got yellow, red, and blue, and then they went with gray and white for the other two. Like,
right?
They didn't want to go with green or purple or orange
No.
any other, just
Too
gray
fun.
and white. Yeah. So they have society divided, and then each of the factions has kind of a role within society that it fulfills.
Yeah.
And so they divide everybody up into these, and then at a certain age, no matter which faction you were born into, you get to take a test that supposedly reveals to you what your destined faction should be, and then you get to choose. And they kind of say, you should choose what the test shows you because it's your real self.
Right.
But you can still choose. And so the beginning of the movie, Triss and her brother Caleb, I think.
Yep.
Caleb. It's like their choosing day, which, by the way, I mean, are they twins? Are they the same age? Is it tied to a year?
If I remember correctly in the book, I want to say they were like a little over a year apart. So they happened to fall within that time range.
Okay.
Like it would have been probably a back-to-back pregnancy for their mom. Like she had a very short recovery.
So it's not necessarily at a certain age. It's probably more like, graduating from college or grad school. We do graduations in the spring. If you finish in December or May, you're going to walk.
Then this is when, that's kind of how I took it.
Okay.
It's like, okay, this time of your life, not this set age when it happens.
So they were both a part of, I think, the abnegation faction. They were wearing gray, which they said abnegation serves people. I didn't really get if that was they were the government or if they were like clergy.
So it's kind of a weird hybrid. Definitely abnegation, when you look at the factions at the beginning of the series, they are the ones who lead government because they're selfless. They're trusted to run the government in a way that is best for everyone. But they're also the ones who will legit like go out and feed the homeless and make sure that people have clothes. And, they put a high priority on making sure you don't have vanity. So you see the scene where, Triss has a certain amount of time to look in the mirror. Those sorts of things are really key to kind of how that faction runs and operates.
So Triss and her brother and mom and dad are all a part of that faction. And as they're getting ready to do this sorting hat ceremony, they show up at this place and all of the factions are going into an assigned door. So you kind of see this big line of people that's gray and white and blue and red and yellow. And then, the red's not there yet. But while they're all in line, the Dauntless faction riding what I think is an ever perpetual elevated train that just goes around the city. Maybe without a driver. I was really unsure of that.
It looked pretty automated.
This train just kind of shows up and this group of, I couldn't help watching that part think about the episode of The Office where Dwight and Andy and Michael are yelling parkour and bouncing off of stuff. That's to me what those people coming off that train kind of look like. I just wanted them to be yelling parkour and jumping and rolling and that kind of thing. So they show up and Triss is just mesmerized with them. She can't take her eyes off of them. So when they go into this thing, it's they got to take this test, which seems to be you just sit down in a dentist chair and you get injected with a hallucinogen.
Yep. And then you go through this kind of mental game, and depending on your response, this is your predominant personality trait. Therefore, this is the faction that you would best suit with.
Did everybody have, I know that later on, 4 puts Triss through something similar, and he knew what the hallucinations were going to be.
Yeah.
Is that the test as well? Like, does everybody encounter the same thing, or is it more whatever your brain manifests is the...
Remember if there was a really specific, like, outlined way that it happened. I know for me, the way that I perceived it, because I did actually read the books in addition to watching the films way back when. It seemed to be a very personal, we don't know what your hallucination is going to be, but you're going to kind of have something come up for you personally that you've got to sort through. And then we're going to, like, there's this weird brain connection where the tester can see what the testee is going through in their head. Yeah. And so, like, they watch it and interpret the results. It's like, oh, well, you did this, which means that, you know, you really valued the honesty and that, therefore, candor.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of how they find out what option they should choose. However, based on whatever her response was, when Triss wakes up, she's like, the tester is in a little bit of a panic, and she's like, we got to get you out of here because you're none of them, you're all of them, and you're none of them. And that makes you divergent, roll credits. Yeah. Which is, I think, representative of you have more free will or willpower than other people, and you will be tougher to control. Yeah. Because as it comes out later, these factions were really designed to keep people in line so that a war or an uprising or whatever it was that led to dystopia doesn't happen again.
Right. And it was interesting the way, like, you see that early on around the testing. Like, there is this really incongruent thing with, like, trust the test, choose what the test tells you. Oh, but you can choose for yourself. But then there's also this added pressure of, like, make sure you're choosing well, because this is a permanent choice. Yeah. Like, you don't get to choose again. You don't get to change your mind. You have to know this about yourself right now.
And you find out the consequence of, like, let's say you make your choice and then you go, I don't want to be with this. Instead of being able to go back to your family, you become factionless, which these people are, like, outcast. They're just not regarded well. I think that it seems like you can't get a job. You can't be a part of a community. So, you know, you rely on, well, I guess the abnegation faction to kind of provide for you, even though you're not a part of that.
Right.
And so there is this kind of permanence that's implied to your choice, which is, you know, another fear tactic. So, like, Triss, her brother gets called first. He picks erudite. So he goes from being selfless to being intellectual. And also, by the way they make their choice is
wasn't that interesting?
They have a table at the front of an auditorium with bowls on it, and each bowl has in it a representation of an element. I think there's, like, rocks, and there's also, like, coals that are on fire. They walk up, they pick up, there's one knife for who knows how many children that are going to be doing this. And then they don't do a little finger prick, but they slice their palm.
Yeah.
And then just hold it over a bowl. Yeah. And that makes their choice.
Yeah. Again, like, to me, I think that the symbolism of the permanence of that and the dedication of that was very interesting. You know, it's like you see them throughout the series several times, faction before blood, but the way you make your choice is by giving your blood. And so, like, again, to me, that there's this huge symbolism of how permanent a tie this is and how much you're giving up of yourself in that choice.
By doing something that's really unsanitary. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, okay, seriously, maybe it's the pandemic, but I was so glad for the split-second shot. You at least see somebody wipe off the knife.
Yes.
They don't sanitize it, but at least they wipe it off, right?
Oh, it's so gross.
Yeah.
But Triss chooses Dauntless, you know, which makes sense. She could take her eyes off of him. And then as soon as you make your choice, you don't go back and sit with your family. You go sit with your new faction. And when they leave, shouting parkour and bouncing off of things. They run and jump back on the train. They have an obstacle course just to get back to their headquarters, which is, there's a lot like Harry Potter when it comes to this. Harry Potter has the houses, this has the factions. You have to know the series of things you have to do to get into your faction house, just like in Harry Potter. You have to jump from the train onto a rooftop and jump from the rooftop
down into this
alley
black hole
where there's a sinkhole. Yeah. And this is really where I started to think about this kind of like Daredevil versus Overly Cautious, because at each one of these steps kind of leading up to her entrance into the headquarters of Dauntless, Triss has a hesitation, but then they get to this place where you have to jump off this building into this sinkhole, and Jai Courtney, Captain Boomerang, John Connor. I don't know if he was John Connor. He might have been the Terminator in that movie, but he's like, somebody says something like, is there water down there? And he's like, there's only one way to find out who's going to go first. And she doesn't even, it's this like I volunteer as tribute moment where she just says like, I'll go. Yeah. And she stands up there, and I think either at that point or later when she brings her dad and some others back, she says out loud, don't think.
Yeah.
And then she
says that later when she brings them back.
But she jumps and she finds out there's a net down there. But there are just several places in the story where it seems like instead of being brave, in the sense that, you know, being brave isn't not having fear. Being brave is recognizing you have fear and being able to still make a choice in it.
Right.
You know, instead of doing that, it just seems like she turns herself off.
And it's interesting because for me, my perspective was a little bit different in that moment. Like I remember, you know, when the tester did see those divergent results, she said something to the effect of, the test didn't work for you. And Triss is like panicking too. And she's like, I'm supposed to trust the test. What do you mean the test didn't work for me? She's like, well, trust yourself. And so for me in that moment, when she made the choice to jump, it almost felt a little bit like maybe that was her first step in trying to trust herself in doing something.
I could get that. I think I might be projecting. I mean, to me, it's, you know, how can you make a choice if you don't know what you're choosing?
And
but
I think
if you're an intuition-based person instead of a head case, you know, like I am, then I could see that just being like, I'm listening to whatever my intuition is to say go for it.
Because I think for me, when I watched her go through all those series of this is what you have to do to get on the train, and now we're going to do this to get off the train, and like all of these fear-based moments of not knowing, and then, okay, here you go. You want to be dauntless? This is what you got to do. She's like, well, I know I want to be dauntless. So if nobody else is doing this, then yeah, I'm doing this.
Oh, that's interesting. So I think from like the perspective that I was taking, I need information about the present moment to make a decision about the future. And it seems like what you're presenting about Triss, she has information about the future to make a decision in the present moment.
Right. It's not a whole lot of information.
Right.
But she knows enough to say, like, I need to make a choice on what faction I'm going to be and who I'm going to show up as. And I know enough to say that I want to be dauntless.
And she knows consequences of not either making the choice or of not following through on the choice.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's interesting.
This is why I love these conversations, right? Because like you can't have this conversation without your own history and your experience coloring how you take it. Yeah. And I love that.
That's why I love having guests on the show instead of doing like a permanent co-host or just doing it by myself, because I've only got one perspective.
Right. Same here.
Yeah.
So
but then when you put two perspectives together, I think you end up finding something interesting. So Triss continues on her journey, and you know, like most like Joseph Campbell hero's journey kind of things, she keeps encountering obstacles. She keeps encountering crucibles. That she has a choice. Either I can be changed and continue on, attempting to overcome really, I guess there is an external conflict she's facing, but so much of it is overcoming what's inside of her to get to where she wants to be.
Yeah.
I can either do that, or I can stop where I'm at and become factionless, you know?
Yeah. And I think, again, like so much of that for me, watching her journey, paralleling some of my, personal work, I see those moments as almost this really quick recognition of like how I'm feeling, what's going on in my body, what are my emotions, and being in that place as she's learning herself and gaining that awareness, and she's working towards this end goal. Like she wants to pass, she wants to officially be accepted into the Dauntless faction. It's this kind of rapid fire transformation where she's able to connect with herself and create that safety in herself, even when she's facing these really hard, scary things. And because she's able to do that, and this is probably where I'm projecting some, because she's able to do that, she's not reacting all the time. She's actually making a choice and responding. And so I see that shift, I think so much just in people in general. Fear a lot of times does either stunt you, shut you down, or wake you up and motivate you. And she kind of makes this shift to where it's almost a decision of like, I'm not going to let fear shut me down. So I need to learn how to engage with it and pay attention to it and make a choice even when I feel that fear.
I think that fear becomes a signal for her. Like she learns, if I'm afraid of something, at least it's something I should be paying attention to.
Yeah.
At most, it is the direction that I should head in. And I remember saying, well before I ever got into therapy as a client, so that was years before I got in as a student and of course as a practitioner. But I remember saying to myself pretty early on, if I'm afraid of something, that's usually the way that I need to go. And now that I'm even saying that, that brings kind of that daredevil and overly cautious thing in, because even recognizing that and going, yeah, I'll run into the fire instead of not, kind of demonstrates that same concept. But that was mainly, I think, in me. I guess that was recognizing the signal early on. I think it was certainly recognizing that I had a limitation, that fear could control me. And I wanted to be in control myself, which I'm even saying that now and going like, oh yeah, well, it was still controlling you. You're just running in a different direction than.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's true, like of emotions in general. Like we want to control, we want to manage. And I don't think realistically that's how it works, right? Like we just feel feelings and we take from that and we use that as information, not as a deciding factor. But so often I think we're kind of conditioned to go one way or another, where either we shut it down and we intellectualize and we go to the rational part of our mind, or we over-identify with the emotion and we make a decision, a lot of times reactive from what I've seen, both personally and professionally, a decision out of the emotion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that, we were talking about the choice of faction having this air of permanence to it. I think that so often we get caught up in believing that when we notice that we're having a feeling and we respond to it, that our responses are permanent as well.
Yeah.
When the truth is, relationally, that your response in the moment counts less than your ability to circle back and repair.
Yep.
And I think that takes humility to be able to do that. And I think it also takes an ability to engage with our fear, because I think it's a really vulnerable thing to circle back and repair, to say,
oh yeah,
hey, I really messed up. I was wrong. I'm sorry I hurt you. Will you forgive me? Because that just makes you vulnerable, because what if they won't forgive you? I mean, insert any message that a person tells themselves in that moment.
Yeah,
But that, I think a lot of times people get stuck in relational conflicts because they believe, well, this choice that I've made is permanent, and there's no way that somebody would ever engage with me, forgive me, relate to me again.
absolutely. Like we walk into it with this, again, this permanent decision on what the other person's response is going to be based on our own fears and our own experiences in our past. And again, like a lot of that for me goes back to some of the reparenting work that I'm having to do, and some of that work with my clients, really recognizing what are the stories and the messages that you got from your childhood, whether it was direct or indirect. What do you believe as a result of your growing up? And is that actually serving you now? Because if it's not, let's rewrite that. Let's reparent that part of you so that you have a healthier perspective and you can engage in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is a tough thing, I think, to naturally wrap your mind around. Because I think a lot of times we just think, well, I'm fully baked.
Yep.
Like the timer's gone off. And especially if you're, in your adult years, like old dog, new tricks, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And you think, well, this is who I am, and this is what I like, and this is what I don't like. And I think that, one of the strange, a client said this to me the other day. You always bring stuff back to family and childhood stuff and parents. And and I was like, do I? Do that, or do you do that? And I just pointed out, the answer is yes to both.
Yep.
But it's mainly because just recognizing we have this ability, which is a self-protective thing, that when we're so little, if nobody is modeling, demonstrating, teaching us how to engage our emotions in a way that teaches us, oh, I can live through this feeling.
Yep.
Then what happens is we get a little taste of hurt, a little taste of pain, sadness, whatever it is. And then we go, I don't want to ever feel that again. So now let me form a blanket rule. Let me make a vow. Let me develop a worldview that says, I, as a person, only do this. I, as a person, never do this, because I want to stay as far away from the chance of having that feeling as I ever can again. And so as an adult, we go, well, this is just who I am. But really, we've got this little 7-year-old inside of us in one of those like steampunk control rooms that's like kind of like controlling our decisions and stuff. And the work then becomes not, diagramming in one of those like conspiracy theory movies on a cork board, all of your values, and have red string going between all of them and re-examining and rewriting. But it just becomes, hey, you felt so vulnerable and scared back then. And to keep yourself safe, you made this vow.
Yeah.
Is that vow keeping you safe now, or is it hurting you?
Yeah.
What was the purpose of the vow? How did you use it to protect yourself? Is it possible that there is something else that could help you feel safe so that you can do these things that you want to do, but the vow holds you back?
Yeah. And to bring it back to the film, like looking at that point, it makes me wonder, what were those messages that we got this society that's broken down into these 5 factions, right? That they're protecting themselves in this way, and they've decided this is what's most important.
Yeah.
Nothing else. We don't go that way because that's that other faction, right? And I'll say this too, like looking at Dauntless in particular, and doing some of this work for myself and with my clients, like I'm learning so much about the importance of really tapping into our bodies. And the way that physical movement and sensory input really helps regulate our central nervous system, right? Like that's a parenting thing with my little, who's having meltdowns and like struggling to just be calm in her body, And so she's
Yeah.
having a lot of trouble processing any big emotions that she feels because of that. Like, you see Dauntless being very physically engaged and really tapping into their bodies in a very natural way. Now, I don't think it's the healthiest way, because let's look at the context of the film, right? But I love that there is this element to this faction where it is an intuitive, felt sense of your body.
Mm-hmm.
And there's almost this kind of underlying thought that for this protection in this faction where we place bravery over everything else, they're also really good at keeping their bodies, in emotional terms, relatively calm, if we can kind of push the boundaries and go there, by being so exertive and doing so much physical activity.
They're certainly able to engage in the here and now.
Yeah.
And that's really been, I think, on the show this year, a theme, because in my life this year, it's been a theme, that recognizing that a great way to stay grounded, regulate anxiety, and literally practice mindfulness by being in the here and now is to engage your body in movement in a way that you can't time travel at the same time.
Yep.
You can't be ruminating on the past. You can't be worried about the future, because if you do, you'll fall off the surfboard. If you do, a basketball will hit you in the nose. Like if you do. So naturally your brain tunes in, and your brain and your body work as one. And then and I remember I think I said this on the show before, the first time that happened was when I had just moved to San Diego, a month after moving there, which involved getting a new apartment, having no friends, starting a new job, being in a new city. A month after moving there, the girl I was dating broke up with me. So I'm like devastated because of all the 5 major areas of change just hit boom all at once. So the guy I was working for bought me a surf lesson. I go out into the ocean for an hour, hour and a half. And when I finish, as well as being exhausted, I also felt like refreshed. And then it was one of these moments after a breakup where you go, oh my gosh, I didn't think about her. And then you think about her a lot, because you just realize I missed an hour and a half of doing it. What's going to happen? But I remember going like, oh my gosh, this is relief. It's relief that my brain hasn't decided to pack a suitcase and go somewhere else from my body.
Yeah.
But to have the whole system engaged as one.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't use my arms for the next week because of the surf lesson. But
dude, I'm not surprised.
But that's shown up as a theme in my life this year, is just kind of like realizing the power that physical movement has in my mental health.
Yeah.
And it seems like, if nothing else, Dauntless had that going for him.
Yeah. And I'm not sure that we have time to speculate on everything else they didn't have going for them, but that's not the point of this talk.
So I think that, like, in the end, we see that, I don't know if it was erudite or if it was just Kate Winslet's character Janine, but they were controlling. Was it just Dauntless, or was it everybody?
So it was just Dauntless, and not even the entire faction of Dauntless, because there was this weird, like, Dauntless kind of administration was on board with Janine and her administration in this plan to control and take over the government thing. I definitely did get a sense, though, that, like, Janine's character drove the whole thing. Like, you see her at one point talk about why it's so important to have those factions, and how factions, I think she said something like, it goes against the weakness of our human nature. And Janine really, like, you see her have this really skewed perspective of being human and having emotions is a weakness, and we need to make sure that we don't do that. Therefore, these factions are so important because it limits your range of emotions. And so she has this big idea of control and power and manipulation, and, you know, keeping everybody segregated into their little factions and not knowing everything. And really, you know, you see them kind of manipulate even the media, you know, a couple of times throughout the film, in terms of some of the talk around abnegation and what's going on in the abnegation faction and why they're no longer fit to be the government rulers and why erudite is. So I think she's very much so at the heart of driving this, but she's also kind of gotten her faction pretty much on board.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, she looped in these dauntless administrators to say, hey, we're going to use you as the force behind it.
Which there was like there's like a mind control kind of like.
Yep.
Because that ends up being how Triss kind of like defeats her if she shows up and tells her like, hey, turn this machine off that's controlling people. And then she says, well, I'll die for what I believe in, just like you will.
Yep.
He injects her with the mind control thing, and then she does it.
Yep.
I can't help but think, and I, going back to the Enneagram thing too, I think that one of the reasons why assessments, which I don't even know if you can call the Enneagram an assessment because it's not scientifically formed and based, but I think one of the reasons why those types of things have such a gravitational pull on people is because we have this desire, this innate, like, magnetic force to be a part of a group.
Yeah.
To be accepted, to know that we have what it takes, that we have what we need. And I remember 2 or 3 episodes ago, I can't remember, explaining to a guest, like when I was in high school, I would try on identities like hats. And I said at the time, I said it was because I was trying to find out who I was. But looking back now as an adult, I can say I was trying to find out what group of people would accept me so they could tell me who I was.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have the ability to trust what it was that was inside of me.
Yep.
To know that's who I was. I wanted somebody else to tell me. And that somehow would make me, or I told myself, would have made me feel secure or safe.
Yeah.
That another person, christened me with an identity. And I think that this movie is a similar kind of thing. In a certain way, I guess the Hunger Games is too. In a certain way, Harry Potter has that kind of same thing where not only do you have a person who is an outsider entering into this new world and all of them, but instantly they're put into a group where they're given an identity, they're given an allegiance, they're given a community. And somehow those things anchor that hero, maybe less in this than the others, to where gives them that secure base to where as they go out on the journey and face the other conflicts, face all the other things, they do so knowing, at the end of this day, I'm going to go back to the common room. I'm going to go back to the hole in the ground. I'm going to go back to whatever, and I'm going to be safe.
Right.
I can do all this risk without losing the people that are behind me.
Yeah.
And that's like the dream of everybody.
Right. And I think you're right. It absolutely comes back to that safety that we have. Right. And I think that there's something important to be said for, like, we have to not only find that in our community and our relationships, but we've got to find a way to tap into that for ourselves, because we don't always have access to our people. Yeah. We don't always have access to that, but we've always got our body and our self to kind of come back home to. And that's something that I think takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of awareness, and it can be really difficult if that's not something that you've grown up seeing modeled for you and learning how to do. And I think for the vast majority of people that I know, and for the vast majority of my clients, like, we didn't get that growing up. Yeah. So we're here in adulthood trying to figure out what makes me feel safe so that I can tap into my truth and my knowing and make decisions that feel really appropriate for me and what I believe in. But we're having to figure out, well, how do I feel safe in order to do that? Because even if I know what I think, what about all these people who are going to, put me down or tell me that's not okay or disagree? And what happens if I lose relationships or if I lose that person who I think is so important to me because they see things differently and it's not okay for me to think that way or feel that way.
Yeah. And if you've got that inner message of permanence, that whenever I make a decision, it's final, there's no going back, all that for any step that you want to take towards personal growth, that ups the stakes so high.
Yeah.
That I think that it increases the fear.
Mm-hmm.
It increases the chance that you're going to make maybe that you're not going to make a decision. That instinct turns itself on, and you fight, you freeze, you do all these things. I mean, I know that like working with addiction so much, I know you know this, like whenever cortisol hits our brain, whenever stress and anxiety goes up, there's this trap door that shuts between the midbrain where emotions live and the front brain where our logic and decision making lives. And so we don't have access to that ability to engage our higher reasoning. And it's why every 12-step group there is, if a person gets done with their first meeting, they hand them a list of everybody who is willing to give their phone number, so that when they go out into the world and they feel the itch they want to use, they recognize, all right, I can't think straight right now. I'm going to make a phone call. And basically it's saying to that other person, I can't access my higher functioning brain power. Can I borrow yours?
Yep.
Until I calm down enough to where I can think straight again.
Yep. Exactly. And I think that that's, again, like, how are we creating safety, right? Like making that phone call, that's a safe person in that moment, hopefully, right?
Right.
Like, unfortunately, no experience is without fault. And there are a myriad of ways everything can go wrong. But hopefully in those experiences, when we're borrowing safety from others, that is how that experience goes. And it's a really natural thing. And it helps us to learn, how do we tap into self, and how do we, stay in that place of connection with who we are.
Yeah.
Because that is such a natural shut off when we have any big emotion that comes up around things and we don't have access to our rational brain.
Yeah. And I kind of wonder if that message of permanence, if there is an antidote to that, or an antithesis to that, if that message would be, I have what it takes to circle back and repair. Because if you're so concerned with making every decision, quote unquote, correctly on your first pass, that's going to limit you. Versus if you innately know, I want to obviously make this decision correctly, but if I don't, or if I just change my mind because I'm a person, and as I grow, my values change, my principles change, the things that I want to do change, then I can always circle back and do what I need to do to make something right. Yeah. And I wonder if those are kind of maybe not even in opposition, but maybe different ends of a pole.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that being able to have that understanding that repair is always accessible, you can always make that reach regardless of how it's received. Right. Too. Like, I don't think that plays a role in this. For us to know I have the ability to do this eliminates the pressure, and it changes the way that we do things.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. Well, I think we could do a couple of more hours on this movie that is not great.
Probably.
But I think what's strange is there's so many things about it that I feel like are topical for where we're at in the world today.
Yeah.
We do have this, I don't know what the right word is, polarizing world where because everything seems like it's chaotic, we gravitate towards people who, if they're not like-minded with us, then they are certainly saying things that are attractive to us because it makes us feel safe. And we feel like if I align myself with them, there's less risk. There's less inherent risk in the world. And, it seems like that was kind of the original idea with these factions. Like, we're going to put people with people that are like them, and which creates echo chambers. And then hopefully there won't be as much conflict in the world.
Right. And it's like, sure, it functions for a while, but at what cost? Right? Like,
I think
what
the
are
cost
we
of personal
losing in
freedom.
doing this?
Yeah. And I really like I think one of the things that I like so much about kind of the journey that you've been on, not that what I like matters in that case, but I think certainly something that I find attractive because it's something that I have found in my own personal journey, and that I think because of that, I emphasize with my clients all the time is you can trust yourself.
Mhm.
You have what it takes inside to pursue what you want to pursue, to be who you want to be.
Yeah.
And there's no such thing as making a decision that you can't walk back from and repairing.
Right. Right. And I think part of the reason why I love watching Triss throughout this film is because she starts at that foundation of knowing who she is, right? And from that place, she's got that safety, she's got that grounding to know, like, even if I do have a misstep, I can find a way to come back.
Yeah. I'll say this and we'll move on to the next question. I think in this internal struggle of trusting yourself, one of the ways that I have recognized, an inner message that becomes a trigger that limits me is whenever I feel like I don't know how to do something.
Mm.
I feel excluded. I feel left. I feel lonely. Loneliness for me ends up, leading to anger or rage. My willfulness kicks in. I'll do it myself. I don't need
Mm-hmm.
you, which leads to disconnection, which is a self-perpetuating, because the disconnection is kind of what started the whole thing. So one of the things that I've learned is, when that kind of like a feeling of I don't know what to do, inevitably that's followed up with toxic shame.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that means that you are dumb or that developmentally you're not where you should be, blah, blah, blah. So to combat that, kind of a reframe, really, I don't even know if it's that. It's just the truth that I've told myself that's really benefited me is just because you don't know something doesn't mean you can't know something.
Ooh, I love that.
So what resources do you have, be it relational, be it, information based, be it whatever, that you can reach out to and ask or seek help,
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, knowing that at some point in that cycle, toxic shame comes in, the gift of shame, healthy shame is humility that leads to relationship. So even just recognizing, well, just because I don't know it doesn't mean I can't know it. So who do I have in my life that I can go to and say, hey, I need some help with this. Can you help me? It
Mm-hmm.
engages so many more areas of my inner person rather than letting, loneliness lead to toxic shame, lead to isolation, lead to, all of the other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely resonate with that. I think for me, it's anytime I have a sense that somehow I am responsible for somebody else's emotions and feelings, whether it's, kind of a victim stance from them and their comments, or just seeing them be really highly reactive in their emotions. I automatically feel that somehow I'm responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And that automatically puts me into that place of, great, now I have to do it all again. There's no space for me. I don't get to have my emotions. I don't get to take care of myself. And so for me, it's coming back home to that truth of, I do get to be supported and it is okay for me to feel. And I get to ask for what I need and have my needs met.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really kind of coming back into that space of like, hey, just because this is your history and this is sometimes how you feel, that doesn't mean that this is true in your relationships.
But getting out of default mode is really tough sometimes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Just because it's it's like muscle memory,
Oh yeah. Oh
practice
yeah.
practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Because if you practice the I don't know, ineffective, unhealthy, unproductive, whatever you want to call it, if you practice that way, you're just
Right.
reinforcing all that stuff.
Exactly.
I'm wondering if you could tell me something that your clients have taught you.
Mm. Um, the first thing that comes to mind, I've got an amazing client who I've worked with for several years. who very early on, when I branched out into coaching, was like, yes, that, I want that. Kind of switched gears with me. And I have seen this like huge transformation in her just over the last few months. And she has really taught me how freeing it is to kind of release other people's expectations of you and thoughts about how you should show up, and actually showing up as yourself, just unabashed and unashamed, and saying, this is what I like, and this is what I want, and this is how I'm going to do my life. And I have loved watching her just flourish and gain so much energy and confidence in herself by really, really letting go of what other people, may put on her as an expectation. Not that she just doesn't care or isn't impacted by that at all, because I think that, we're relational human beings. Naturally, we're going to care to some extent, but she doesn't put stock in that as much. She puts stock in, what do I want? What's my truth?
Yeah.
And that's been a really awesome thing to see and to kind of learn from watching her journey and being a part of that journey with her, how important that is and how much of a difference that it can make for you.
Yeah. I think it's so tough to do what we do and not be inspired by the people that we are quote unquote helping.
Right?
Because we just get to sit and witness people in a brave way take on the most tremendous challenges in their life and make change. And there's no way you can't be inspired by that.
I can't tell you how many times I've sat across from somebody and I've been talking through something with them, and either their situation is mirroring mine, or as I'm talking, I'm like, I should really probably actually do what I'm telling them to do,
Yeah.
Because it's so inspiring to see them on this journey and see them grow and come into this, place of their own and just really living their life fully with such authenticity and such vulnerability.
Yeah. I said to a client the other day, right as I was getting ready to tell him something, I said, and I'm saying this into a mirror at the same time so that I can hear it myself, because it is just kind of recognizing, sometimes my work looks a little bit like your work. Tell me something that you do to take care of yourself.
Going off of kind of this reparenting conversation and finding safety and whatnot. One thing that I have been doing with a lot more intention recently, it is literally physically holding myself and my body and my emotions. Putting my hand over my heart, a lot of times at 7 months pregnant, kind of wrapping my other arm around my belly, and being very intentional with when I am feeling something. I don't care if I can label it, appropriately as shame, or just, I notice that I'm really uncomfortable behind my right shoulder blade, like literally holding myself in that space and just noticing and giving me like that time to breathe and say, okay, this is what this feels like. And taking a pause and really just identifying that and holding myself in my body and coming back home to myself in that space to create that safety and say, it's okay to feel this. I recognize it's uncomfortable right now. Okay, I'm feeling this. And I think doing that practice has helped me then expand pretty naturally into a space of feeling grounded and safe, because it's almost as though I'm showing up for myself, kind of, again, doing some reparenting work, holding on to my little girl, in my childhood, to say, this is okay. We're safe in this feeling. And that's been really, really helpful.
So, I mean, that sounds like radical acceptance almost. Like it, I think that something that I get caught up in sometimes is thinking that there is a right way to experience my inside self, my emotions. Like I have to be able to name the emotion first, and then I need to document where it's coming from and blah, 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 versus it sounds like something that you're recognizing as no matter what flag gets raised first, whether it's a physical experience, whether it's a ability to acknowledge and name an emotion, or whether it's like a, I don't know, intellectual kind of thought-based kind of thing. Whatever it is, I'm going to engage it. I'm going to accept it, and I'm going to sit with it, not run away from it, knowing that all of those things are a part of my holistic experience as a person.
Yep. I'm really great at getting in my head and looking at the story and running with that story. And so for me, part of this practice has been very, very intentionally, with a whole lot of awareness, staying out of that.
Yeah.
And really just trying to notice my body, and release that pressure of having to have the right words for it. Like I'm such in that clinical mindset of this is how I describe it and this is how it should sound and all of those things, that it's been really, there have been times it's just flat out been hard for me to do that.
Yeah.
And for it to be okay for me just to feel something without having to name it and judge it and identify where does this come from and the story that it relates to and all of those things, and just be really, really, really present in my body and in this moment.
Yeah. And it's not so much that like brain bad, no brain, don't do that. It's more like recognizing, all right, I've got a default way of doing things.
Yep.
And, you know, the goal of therapy, recovery, whatever you want to call it, is not, I'm going to turn my brain off so that my heart comes online. It's not, I'm going to turn my heart off so my brain comes online, or I'm going to ignore my instinct. So it's, how do I get all three of these things functioning at 100% at the same time, knowing that they each have a role in the journey.
Yes.
And something to contribute. So it's not like you're saying, I'm trying to think less. What you're what you're saying is, I'm trying to learn that I can rely on parts of myself that aren't my brain and trust them as much as I trust my brain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's being able to slow down enough to really drive that home. And, you know, for me, I call that, you know, my truth and my intuition.
Yeah.
You know, that culmination of all three, where you've got that and you're listening to all of those parts. And I tend to rush through things. And so, you know, kind of slowing that down and coming back to my body really is a practice of trusting myself and bringing that safety back into my world.
Yeah. So let's say that somebody has been listening to our conversation today and they just think to themselves, as they should, Jess is amazing. I want to become her client. How can they get a hold of you? How can they engage with you?
Best, easiest thing, find me on Instagram, Jess_Whitfield_confidence. Shoot me a DM, get in my little inbox there. We can connect via email if that's easier after that point, but that is just the easiest way to get in touch with me on a regular basis. That is where I am most present and engaged. I'm not going to lie, I've got a little bit of a rebel in me that says I don't like to do the traditional way of doing things. So I actually, in the midst of this transition in my business, shut down my website, and it's like, we're not going to touch that right now. I'm going to ignore the fact that it even exists, and we're just going to be on Instagram for a little bit.
Well, I think that's a good example of trusting your intuition. Yeah.
Yep.
I like that. Practice what you preach. Cool. Well, Jess, I mean, sheesh, you're just an amazing person. And I'm just so glad that, to have you back on. And I'm so excited that you're growing your family. You're going to have another little one. And I can't wait to have you back for round 3.
Thanks so much, Josh. I love being on here. You're so easy to talk to. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining me this week in the theater. I'll make sure I save a seat for you and a friend next week. Let's raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.